Dwarf's penis gets stuck to vacuum cleaner. That was the headline that made me hate the internet. Were you one of the thousands of readers that clicked on that link about 3 years ago? After all, it was asking for it. Just blinking there on the top of the top 5 most read stories on the Age website. Can't remember? Here's the lead. A dwarf performer at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival had to be rushed to hospital after his penis got stuck to a vacuum cleaner during an act that went horribly wrong. Come on, you can admit it. You weren't the only one to go there. It was one of the most popular stories of that week, that month even. You clicked, you read, some of you may have even rated it out of 5. But admit it, you felt cheap and dirty afterwards. Because it's headlines like that that got online news our reputation. It cheapened us. It robbed us of our credibility. It chipped away at our self-esteem. We were the cheap date, the fling on the side, the guilty secret. Newspapers was still the one you woke up next to in the morning, and the evening news was always waiting faithfully for you at home every night. And every time you clicked on a cheap link like that, a wire story that was only there to keep the ad sales team happy so that they could brag about page impressions, a journalist died a little bit inside. Celebrities who are fruit. Pardon? That sentence doesn't even make sense, I hear you say. That was a real photo gallery doing the rounds on the Daily Telegraph website around the same time as the embarrassed dwarf. Stay with me here, it's a complex concept. It consisted of 22 slides of Hollywood celebrities with their heads photoshopped to look like pieces of fruit, nuts and vegetables. For example, Johnny Cashew, Tomato Cruz, Asparagus Van Sant. The fruit heads was more clicked on than the story that covered the latest Baghdad death toll that week. That and a chihuahua named Chelsea wearing sunglasses. Was this really the future of online news? I was lucky enough to be spat out of journalism school in the early 2000s, teetering on the edge of a very inconvenient tipping point. I was ready for the romance of print, which in my mind consisted of a vague amalgamation of All the President's Men, Citizen Kane, The Sweet Smell of Success, My Year of Living Dangerously, and Superman. The internet had other ideas. Of course, newspapers didn't know that yet, and neither did I. But given I found myself in the middle of a technological revolution that would fundamentally change the way we communicate across the globe in ways we couldn't even begin to imagine, well, really there was no time for nostalgia. Instead, I was staring down the barrel of a new news culture that told writers that web traffic was more important than a great quality story, that could get the editor of Gawker bumped for not sufficiently sexing up his stories, that fired an Australian tech journalist for not generating enough hits. The New York Times columnist and now compulsive blogger David Carr wrote back in 2007, "Here at the Times, the most emailed list on our website has gone from being an in-house curiosity to a measure of salience, as much as getting an article on the front page. The list can be wonderfully idiosyncratic. Last Friday, a story about using animal training on husbands, What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage, appeared alongside Thomas Friedman's meditation on the president's plan to send more troops to Iraq." Admit it, you like the sound of Shamu. In the reassuringly prehistoric world of the newspaper, you picked the New York Post, or the Sun UK, or the Daily Telegraph back here, or the Herald Sun for maybe a page 3 girl and all your celebrity news. For the naturally superior, there was the Grey Lady, or the Washington Post, the Times, the Age, the Australian, the Guardian, and with only the Wall Street Journal's stipple pics to whip you into an overstimulated frenzy. Your choice of masthead defined you. You bought into the kudos, or you liked the crap. But then the column lines began to blur online as editors appealed to readers' penchant for sex and gore to generate traffic. And where does the next generation factor in all of this? We who grew up with newspapers may know better. But what about the generation whose soft pink fingertips have never been sullied by ink, who have no time to set aside for the evening news? Soon they'll have mobiles grafted to their earlobes and they'll demand that all their news content gets delivered on them. And what kind of content will they demand? That's the question. If they haven't grown up with well-resourced, in-depth, fearless investigative journalism, how will they know to ask for it? These were just some of the concerns that I had about the state of online news during what I now refer to as the year of the dwarf penis. But while I was lamenting the loss of a journalistic world that I'd never known, based on a set of assumptions that were already vastly overblown, the internet just got on with it. This week, a research firm released the results of what they billed as the biggest ever study of global online habits. They revealed a global shift away from traditional media, with 61% of online users using the internet daily against 54% for TV, 36% for radio, and 32% for newspapers. And according to other Internet World stats, in 2009, there were more than 750 million internet users in Asia. And that represents more than 40% of global users. This is compared to Europe with about 23% and North America with only 14%. China already has around 384 million internet users, the largest number of internet users in the world. So the internet, it turns out, is bigger than Rupert Murdoch's ego and ambitions. It's bigger than the Fairfax board's internal disputes or the Australian Financial Review's lawsuits over outlets copying their headlines. And it's definitely bigger than the narrow Western world vision of what media means. So here are some of the headlines that changed my mind about online news. First headline: Iranian woman killed in protests in Tehran, June 09, YouTube. The footage of the death of Neda Agha Sultan drew international attention after she was shot dead during the Iranian election protests. Her death was captured on video by bystanders and broadcast on the internet. It was described as probably the most widely witnessed death in human history. Next headline: Investigate your MP's expenses, The Guardian, June 09. Following the disclosure of British MP expense claims and the scandal that ensued, The Guardian asked readers to join them in digging through the documents of MP's expenses. They uploaded over 450,000 pages of documents. So far, over 27,000 readers have reviewed over 200,000 of those documents, generating hundreds of stories. Next headline: Collateral Murder, WikiLeaks, April 2010. WikiLeaks posted video from an incident in which Iraqi civilians were alleged to have been killed by US forces on a website that they called controversially Collateral Murder. In July of this year, WikiLeaks then released the Afghan War Diaries, a compilation of more than 76,000 documents about the war in Afghanistan not previously available for public review. One more headline: Election 2010, Day 14, or Waste and Mismanagement, the Media. July 30, Grog's Gamut blog. Grog's Gamut, public servant by day, blogger by night, posted an entry addressed to all the news directors around the country that began: Bring home your journalists following Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, because they're not doing anything of any worth except having a round-the-country Twitter and booze tour. Each of those stories in their own way represents a major shift in the way online media works. Through the crowdsourcing of The Guardian's MP's expenses project, to the unfiltered dissemination of information through WikiLeaks, to the self-examination that a little hobby blogger like Grog's Gamut could provoke among the Australian press gallery. Right now, across the media landscape, from the little bloggers to the big media moguls, there's one thing that all of these competing outlets have in common, and that is that nobody knows what they're doing. And it's exhilarating. Good online media outlets and good online journalists understand this vital fact, and for many it informs the way they write and present information. They must write intelligently, logically, transparently, embedded with links to back their story. Then they tweet it. I know I've come a long way when I can say that with a straight face. But there's nothing cheap about Twitter. Social media and the way news is shared on it is one of the most disruptive and exciting developments that online news has seen so far. Because as an online journalist, pressing the publish button is just the start. The story doesn't live and die in a day. It's hashed over, reread and commented on as it gets digested across the web, from websites to Facebook to Twitter to Reddit to Dig. If you've got something wrong, expect to hear about it almost immediately and publicly. This is one of the most rewarding and terrifying aspects of online media. It's also addictive. And it's the prospect of the front page talking back that's luring the big guns away from tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper. Just last week, Howard Kurtz, the veteran Washington Post correspondent, announced the end of his 29-year tenure at the paper in favour of a move to the two-year-old online outlet, The Daily Beast. One writer described the reaction to Kurtz's move as reminiscent of when Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival in '65. So why did he do it? Kurtz tweeted, very modernly, "Harder to innovate online at big company. Time to take a leap." Online journalism can cut through the fat, dispense with the niceties and mock the ego. That doesn't mean that journalists shouldn't be held accountable or that they're excused from being responsible. In fact, it means the very opposite. They're exposed more than ever before. They must be transparent and reactive. They must answer to their readers. A good online masthead can't afford to be arrogant. There's no room for hubris. It's too easy to be made fun of. Take the Twitter storm in a teacup, in which News Limited's Andrew Bolt blogged about a fake Andrew Bolt Twitter account that he'd discovered about a year after the fact. Bolt suggested it was a case of identity fraud and threatened to take action against the unidentified person behind the account. In the wake of Bolt's post, over 50 and counting fake Andrew Bolt accounts bloomed on Twitter. "I'm Andrew Bolt," one said. "No, I'm Andrew Bolt," another insisted. By the time they were finished, no one could tell who the original fake Andrew Bolt was. Poking fun is one of the hallmarks of the culture around online media, partly because of the very uncertainty that new media is built on, and all of which is good news for you readers. News's Michael Wolff wrote recently in Wired magazine, "Reading, it turns out, is not a passive, solitary enterprise. It is deeply tied to social activities. Thanks to the web, readers are no longer just consumers. They are participants and creators in their own right, and they are empowered." So go on, get in there, get up to your elbows in it, and shout back. Of course, taking the leap to online, like journalist Howard Kurtz, is not all clear sailing. There remains that very small matter of how to fund the good stuff, because publications like the Daily Beast are by no means moneymakers, and great journalism is expensive and time-consuming. But as people like Steve Jobs, father of iTunes, corrals content into iPad-sized packages that people seem to be willing to pay for, as fences go up again and control is reasserted across the web, now more than ever there is a role for great journalists and great editors to make sure the good stuff floats to the top, to ensure that their publication cuts through the noise. That's one of the major new learning curves on this great big tipping point that we're jumping off. Restraint is key. In the wake of a mind-numbing 24/7 election campaign, we're all witnessing the media pulling back and reassessing, vowing to slow things down, to recognise that readers still demand quality, that just because you can fill 24 hours with new developments doesn't mean you need to. But that doesn't mean that you don't experiment. The papers may continue to keep themselves nice, but good online journalism must take risks, to consider all the sources of information to be tapped and the best way to do it, whether that be crowdsourcing or collaborating on investigations with universities or other outlets for that matter, to get the story up. Of course, for every WikiLeaks scoop, there's a video of a cat in a t-shirt playing an electronic keyboard that takes Facebook by storm. With the magic of Google Analytics, I have the power to see what has made Crikey's most popular stories over the last 5 years or so. I can see where readership numbers have spiked on a graph. It's all very impressive. And they're sitting alongside our big stories like our election coverage, the US primaries, the night Kevin Rudd was knifed, and the huge traffic day we had when the Independents finally named our new government. There's a headline that still hovers in the top 5 from January of this year. Has Australia really banned small breasts? Ah, well, who says you can't have your little bit on the side? Thanks.